This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop.
Got it.
Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
Good morning. I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber today, the 20th of November, as Steve is out in the woods getting his deer for the year. Hopefully he's staying warm somewhat. It's a cold one out there today. It was 32 when I got up this morning. Supposed to get a high of 43 here in Lansing. It's going to be a little cooler if further you go up north. And you're going to get snow up in Cadillac, Charlevoix. Looking at a high of 38 up there in Charlevoix. Marquette, you can only get a high of 34 if you're listening up there. It's going to be another cold one for Silver Bells in Lansing. If you're listening in Lansing, it's time for our annual Silver Bells in the City parade, fireworks, celebration, downtown Lansing. Anywhere between 50 and 80,000 people come downtown the Friday before Thanksgiving every year to see the big 66-foot Christmas tree lit up. This year it came from the Upper Peninsula. They brought it down a few weeks ago. Got it all spruced up, got all the lights put on it, and have it stuck right there in front of the Capitol. They're going to light it up amid fireworks a little later today. And then afterwards, we're going to hear a performance from Joshua Davis. He's the Grand Marshal of this year's Electric Light Parade. He's going to be performing at the Lansing Center after the fireworks and the lighting and all that. Joshua Davis is known around Lansing, around Michigan, as being the lead singer for the group Steppin' in It. But he was on the NBC show The Voice and actually did a really nice job, advanced quite a ways in that show. Didn't end up winning it, but he was within the final five, if I remember right. A real good singer. And they're going to have him in the Lansing Center this time because every time it seems like we have Silver Bells in the city, it is really, really, really cold. I don't know what it is, because I can remember washing my car on New Year's Day. I can remember warm Thanksgivings. I can remember warm Christmases. But it seems like every time we get Silver Bells in the city, we all freeze. And whether it's high winds or just really cold temperatures, it's always really cold. And it doesn't look like this is going to be an exception to that, unfortunately, for all of us. But we go down there anyway. The parade's really nice. The fireworks are great. Seeing the Christmas tree is a thrill. And we're going to have another good time down there tonight, I'm sure. Well, let's talk about something that we published in MERS yesterday. I thought was really interesting. Our reporter Craig Mauger did a real nice job on this, talking with election officials across the state on what they think about this proposal advancing through the legislature right now to scrap straight party ticket voting on our ballots. When you go ahead and vote in November of 2016 or 2014, if nothing were to change right now anyway, you would go and have the option to vote all Republican, all Democrat, and I think all Libertarian. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but you just kind of scratch a line there and basically everything down the ballot is taken care of. Now, there are a lot of voters who end up using this option. We did a look into this last week and found that in many counties across the state, about 50% of voters use that option. And while it's kind of posed that Democrats traditionally are the ones who use the straight ticket voting option the most, folks in urban centers, actually we saw in Ottawa County, which is heavily Republican, uses this at a clip of 60%. Straight ticket voting for elections fluctuate, obviously. We talked with Target Insight founder Ed Zarpolis. He said that straight ticket voting can be anywhere from 49.5 to 59% of the people who actually vote. So why are Republicans pursuing this? Well, the reasons that they give is that we should encourage voters to educate themselves on all of the candidates who are on the ballot and to go through and make decisions individually, race by race, and that if you keep that straight ticket option on there, people are not going to educate themselves and they do not make informed decisions about the candidates that they vote for. Unfortunately, the clerks say that this is going to create a real logjam when it comes to the polls. We talked with the the Association of County Clerks and the Association of Municipal Clerks yesterday. They are opposed to this bill. They say that this is going to create long lines, and this is also going to create delayed results, possibly up to an hour or two extra to count all the ballots because people are going to be in line longer, and it's going to take a while for all these local election officials to get things to the counties so that they can be counted up. We talked with somebody from the Municipal Clerks Association, who's the clerk in Walker. She highlighted a report from the Pew Charitable Trust that pegged the average election wait time for Michigan at 22 minutes in 2012. That's the nation's sixth highest. I don't have to wait 22 minutes in my poll booth, but apparently there are places in the state where waiting in line is something you just have to put up with. And when you get into the urban areas in particular, it gets even worse. And that's what Democrats have been arguing through this process. They say that the real Machiavellian reason why Republicans are pursuing this is that they see an opportunity for Democrats to go to the polls in these urban areas where they are most likely going to vote Democrat. They see these long lines. They get frustrated. They throw up their hands saying, I got other things to do today. I'm not going to go ahead and stand this line. I'm going to go home and I'm going to do other things and maybe I'll come back. And then they don't. And that this will actually dissuade people from voting. Haven't necessarily seen any statistics on that, but as this goes through the legislature, we may indeed see more information being put out on both sides on this. The Republicans tried this back in 2002. They eliminated the straight ticket option. Democrats automatically went on the referendum trip on this thing and were able to get the question put on the ballot in 2002, rather. The voters said overwhelmingly, we want to keep the straight ticket option, and voted to keep it. This time around, the Republicans have gotten around the referendum option by putting in an appropriation, a spending item into this bill that says that the Secretary of State has X amount of money, I think it was $1 million, to study the effects of straight ticket voting and put that in there. And according to our Constitution, if there is any type of spending or appropriation that is put into a bill, you can't go forward with a referendum on it. They have made it referendum proof. And so now the Democrats are completely howling over this one. To have something like that in the bill, that would mean that there would have to be some type of citizen initiative effort or another type of more expensive option to try and get the issue of straight ticket voting in front of voters. And again, Democrats are a bit cynical on this. They're saying, well, look, if the Republicans want to go ahead and pursue this option, obviously they're trying to divert our attention from other things. While they have the power of the legislature and the governor's office, they can go ahead and pass whatever they want, and we have to react to it. And money and effort spent to undoing something like straight ticket voting is money that can't be spent on other things like electing Hillary Clinton or trying to win a congressional seat, or most importantly here in the state of Michigan, winning back the state house, which I believe is the number one priority for a lot of Democrats in the state, to stop the Republican and dominated legislature, executive branch, all seats of government in the state of Michigan. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of MERS, filling in for Steve Gruber. We'll be back.
Genuine Michigan common sense on display every day.
Never before have I turned on you. You look too good to me. Your beady eyes that could cut me in two.
You're listening to the Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of the MERS newsletter. Filling in today for Steve Gruber. He's out and about hunting deer. Hopefully he bags a couple, 2, 3, and he'll report back to you, I'm sure, on Monday. Joining us on the other end of the line real quickly, Matt from Okemos is calling in on the number. If you want to join in on the conversation, 888-900-9966 is the number you call in. Good morning, Matt. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, good to talk to you. I wanted to mention that we have the NSA to keep us safe, and they're monitoring where we call and how long we talk for. But then we have an immigration policy that is the opposite of keeping us safe. They're bringing people in. And so it's not the same, pathway to get to safety. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't know what's more scary, what you just mentioned there, or the fact that the NSA is actually listening to this broadcast and possibly taping it and monitoring it.
Well, the thing is that they're trying to keep us safe, but the immigration policy is basically not keeping us safe. So if they were to keep the same policy of keeping us safe, they would try to, register these people. I have no problem with Trump's idea about registering them because we're in a different time era. This isn't normal America anymore. This is we're at war. The world is at war, and we need to remember that Americans come first, and the citizens. I think that's what the Democratic Party has lost: is America and the citizens come first.
All right,
that's what we should be.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Matt from Oakham is calling in today. Again, 888-900-9966 if you want to get into the conversation. Joining us now to talk about another issue here is Steve Malanga. He is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and we're going to talk about government employee unions and some court cases that we're hearing at the federal level that could really impact the current dynamic. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Oh, my pleasure.
Give our listeners a little update about what the Supreme Court is considering in regards to government employee unions.
Yeah, well, the Supreme Court has agreed to take a case which really frightens the public sector unions out of California, in which basically 10 teachers sued the California Teachers Union saying that they were required, they didn't want to be a member of the union, but in California, if you don't want to be a member of a government union, you still have to pay them for representing you. And you don't have to pay them full union dues, but you have to pay them maybe 65 to 70% of what union dues are. And they have said this is an infringement of their constitutional rights because they don't agree with the politics of the union. And they said that even on collective bargaining, the union essentially takes political positions. And if the Supreme Court, which has been leaning towards the position that the plaintiffs are making here, if the Supreme Court agrees with them, essentially what that would mean is across the country in about 25 states where workers are forced to pay unions in the government sector money, even if they don't want to belong to them, it would basically mean you would have a right-to-work situation in government unions across the country.
And again, that affects some 23 states across the country. Doesn't necessarily affect Michigan here because we just passed legislation a few years ago that allowed for right-to-work environments in the state of Michigan and in government units. That's something that's been challenged at the court level. And what they decide here, what the Supreme Court decides in this California case, would be a good tip-off on how they would decide future cases as it regards to right to work in public shops, I would imagine.
Well, this case is so all-encompassing that, frankly, were they to the Supreme Court to decide in favor of those who are making the lawsuit, I don't think that the lawsuits in Michigan challenging your law would be they'd be worthless at this particular point, pretty much.
Right, because this is the next step here, right? I mean, what the unions are challenging in Michigan is whether or not you can have a right to work for government entities here in the state. But this is even taken a little bit further here in California, because what they're arguing here is that it's not even the union dues, it's the other dues that are being charged to employees.
Shop, exactly. And this goes back about 30 years or so, and in some states they've essentially said, you don't have a choice. You have to pay the union one way or another. And the crucial issue here is this is a constitutional issue. The California teachers are arguing in their lawsuit that this violates the free speech aspects of the United States Constitution. So were the court to rule in their favor, this would be a sweeping ruling. It wouldn't be something that you would be able to surmount with new legislation in states, for instance.
Now, what the unions have argued is that it actually does cost money to represent employees in these grievance suits and these grievance matters, and that there is a cost to representing employees and that they need to be compensated for the work that they do for these employees. Isn't there something to be said, though, for their argument? And why hasn't this caught on in the courts that folks are getting a service without paying for anything?
Okay, so first of all, it actually has caught on. Going all the way back to 1977, the Supreme Court was asked to rule on this. and they initially ruled, that Supreme Court initially ruled that the workers would have to pay for at least the nominal representation they were getting from the union. For instance, if you're in a workplace and it's unionized and they negotiate salary, in most places you get the salaries whether you're part of the union or not. Now, there's two issues. One of the things which the Supreme Court has had a couple of cases in the last couple of years is that unions have kind of abused this privilege. In a whole bunch of states, including California, it's the union that gets to set the fee that they have to pay. The union that gets to say, oh, okay, well, our normal dues are $900 a year. We're only going to charge you for what we spend on representing you. We're not going to charge you for lobbying and politics and all those other things. And then they pick a number, and the number is consistently very high. So in their original suit, the California teachers who sued, they pointed out all these different conferences. For instance, the unions ran these conferences in California on things like lesbian, gay, and trans, sexual, topics, and they classified that cost as part of collective bargaining, as part of representing workers.
I get you. Well, thanks very much for joining us on this subject. Steve Malanga, he is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber. We'll be back.
Genuine Michigan common sense on display every day.
You're listening to the Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of the MERS newsletter. Coming to you through our home office here in Lansing, Michigan, where it is really cold. 32 degrees at least when I went out this morning. Supposed to get a high of 43. We'll see how that happens. It's even colder up north. We're looking at snow in Cadillac and Charlevoix a little later today. Change subjects here. Calling the federal review report issued in May on a proposal to bury nuclear waste beside Lake Huron deeply flawed. 65 Canadians and U.S. public interest groups have sent a joint letter to the federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, urging her to reject Ontario Power Generation's bid to bury radioactive waste right beside Lake Huron. Join us to talk about this and other subjects as it relates to this issue. Beverly Fernandez is the spokesperson for Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump. Thanks for joining us on the line this morning.
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
So we've also had Michigan's senior U.S. Senator wanting a meeting with Canadian officials to raise objections about this. Why are the Canadians not listening?
Right. Well, we do have a newly elected government in Canada. And with this new government comes, new hope and optimism that the government will protect the millions of people who rely on the Great Lakes from all of the serious risks associated with this plan.
Ontario Power Generation's proposal is to bury 200,000 cubic meters of low and intermediate level radioactive waste produced during reactor operations deep underground in a series of underground caverns carved out of limestone. Sounds pretty safe to me. What's the concern here, Beverly?
Okay, well, there are numerous concerns. First of all, this will be the only nuclear waste dump in limestone on the planet. OPG did not consider any other sites. So in a province with about 1 million square kilometers, the only place they looked at is about a mile from the Great Lakes, the drinking water for 40 million people. And probably the most compelling fact about why this is a dangerous plan is there are only 3 deep nuclear waste dumps on our entire planet, and all 3 have failed and leaked. So what makes OPG think it's special, DGR, right beside the Great Lakes, will not leak, and it must contain its deadly waste for 100,000 years.
Well, let's talk about the type of waste we're talking about. When I spoke with the folks over at Ontario Power Generation a few years ago, they assured me that what they were talking about are rags and mops and things that they're used to clean up the facilities. We're not actually talking about the things that generate the power.
Well, you have to be clear on what is going to go in this. Yes, part of it is mops and rags, Part of the material that would be placed in this nuclear waste dump is resins and filters and components from within the nuclear reactors themselves. And these intermediate level wastes are the ones that remain radioactive and lethal for 100,000 years. So this is far from harmless stuff that is being placed down in this dump. And I will note that no scientist or geologist and no person at OPG can provide us with a 100,000-year guarantee that this nuclear waste dump will not leak and contaminate the Great Lakes.
100,000 years. I mean, that's a tough thing to guarantee. You're basically guaranteeing that it will never leak for as long as this Earth exists. You can't really plan that, can you? I mean, you can't really make that guarantee.
Well, exactly. I'll point out that the U.S. has one of the deep geological repositories that did leak, and that's the WIPP facility in New Mexico. And at that time, the government and the scientists, geologists, everybody said that it would hold its waste safe for 10,000 years. Well, a mere 15 years into its operational phase, it leaked, and it is currently shut down. So I think, when we look at the science, we can see there's a 100% failure rate for these facilities. And the WIPP facility was in a desert. Now, digging down and placing this stuff a mile from the Great Lakes, the largest source of fresh water on our planet, defies common sense.
We're talking with Beverly Fernandez. She's the spokesperson for Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump. What are you guys offering as an alternative? Where can they put this stuff that it's not near the Great Lakes or any type of drinking water source for that matter?
Well, I think, that's the key, what you have said right there. Now, it's not just our group. As you said, there are many organizations that are opposing this, and there are 179 resolutions that have been passed by cities, towns, and counties, both in Canada and the U.S., representing 23 million citizens opposing this plan. And what the vast majority of the resolutions say is that not only should we not have this Kincardine DGR, but we shouldn't have one anywhere in the Great Lakes Basin.
Well, getting to my question, though, what do they do with it now? And what are you guys suggesting they do with this waste?
Well, what happens now is all this waste has been stored above ground safely in containers for over 40 years. Now, it's not our responsibility to decide what should be done with this, and it is a difficult question, and there is by no means agreement. But many people think that it should continue to be monitored above ground in hardened casks that are bomb-proof. And the reason for that is if there's a leak in one of the casks, it can be detected and it can be dealt with. But if this stuff is buried and abandoned, as OPG wants to, if it leaks into the Great Lakes, we will never know until it is too late.
Is it possible to put all this stuff in a rocket and blast it into space?
Well, no. That is just cost prohibitive.
Okay.
There's far too much of it. And then, as we all know, rocket transport is not safe. So if it were to explode, what would happen down below it? So no, that really is not an option.
So what about caverns or something like that? I think that's what they've been doing in Nevada, right? They take their spent nuclear waste and put it in Nevada's many caverns and caves, right?
I can't speak to that, but I do know that in Canada, the plan was many years ago to bury this stuff up in the Canadian Shield, which is granite rock. And the Canadian Shield, a large part of it, falls outside of the Great Lakes Basin. But, again, burying it is one option. Keeping it above ground and monitoring it is another option. It is possible that technology may advance in the future, and we may be able to render this material harmless.
It's interesting, though, keeping this waste above ground, it seems like you got to continuously monitor it forever, basically, don't you?
Well, that would be the recommendation because exactly what if it leaks? We've got to be able to deal with it. But, OPG just wants to stick it in a hole in the ground and walk away after 300 years and abandon it. I mean, as you said, it's hard to wrap our heads around this because the Great Lakes themselves are only 12,000 years old. And yet this material must stay safe and isolated from people and water for 100,000 years. And that is why we are saying, this plan just absolutely defies common sense, and it needs to be stopped. The other thing is,
I'm going to have to stop you right there. I'm sorry, Beverly. We've got to hit a break here, but thank you for joining us. Beverly Fernandez, Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump. You're listening to The Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Mullen, filling in today. We'll be back after this.
Michigan, born and raised with Midwestern values and Michigan common sense.
You're listening to The Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of the MERS newsletter. Closing it out here with the last segment. Thanks for joining us on the broadcast, wherever you may be listening. Whether it's Lansing, our affiliates in Grand Rapids, our folks up north, or if you're online listening in places like, let's say, Mississippi. Appreciate you tuning in and listening to us this morning. We got a big game coming up this weekend. Michigan State, one loss going up against Ohio State. The winner of that game poised to not only win the Big Ten East, but also has an opportunity to get into the national championship discussion. Ohio State, if they are victorious, would still need to beat Michigan, and then they would have to win in the Big Ten championship game against presumably Iowa. But, who knows? They could still lose a couple games and put that into doubt. But the winner of the Big Ten, as things are looking right now, they're going to end up being in the national championship discussion. Joining us on the other end of the line to talk about that is Tim Staudt, a famous sports reporter around town here. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Good morning. It's been a beautiful Friday, so far anyway.
Yeah, so far anyway. Hopefully we won't get any snow here like our friends up north. But what's your thoughts here going to this game here with Michigan State and Ohio State? I watched that Nebraska game and watched our secondary just get torn to shreds. How are they going to be able to contain Ohio State? They weren't able to do it last year.
Well, obviously that's, a big question that everybody's going to have on their mind, heading into tomorrow in Columbus. It's obviously a big day for both of them. And it's hard to find anybody nationally anywhere who is a pundit for these games, who analyzes these games. I didn't find anybody all week other than fans who picked Michigan State to win the game. That doesn't mean they can't, but it does show the general, feeling that Ohio State is the clear-cut favorite to win. And I don't think it's just because of the Nebraska game either. I think Michigan State's had so many close calls all year. That plus their obvious is a question about the health of Connor Cook. And even if he feels good to begin the game, if he gets tapped on that shoulder one time and Ohio State goes after quarterbacks, how is that going to change his dynamic? I mean, all those are questions that leave people thinking that Michigan State has an uphill battle. But, it's rare that they're an underdog, and so maybe that kind of status will help them play better tomorrow.
What does Michigan State have to do to win this game? I mean, obviously they got to score more points than the other guy, but realistically going in, how do they beat Ohio State?
Well, I think Ohio State has to help them for that to happen. And by help them, I mean, are they going to give up a long kick return? Are they going to miss a field goal? Are they going to get a personal foul at the wrong time? Are they going to get a targeting that knocks one of their key guys out of the game? Things like that, let alone the usual bromide about turnovers and all that. I mean, I think if they help Michigan State, that's one way. Then that, and I felt this all year long, Michigan State just does not run the ball effectively and consistently. The only team with the worst running yards per carry in the Big Ten is Purdue. Michigan State is 13th out of 14 teams running the ball. And against Ohio State, I think you're asking a lot if you absolutely cannot run the ball, with some degree of consistency, if for no other reason to run the clock and keep your defense off the field. If they can run the ball a bit and get some help, and then obviously don't make many mistakes, and Michigan State doesn't make many mistakes. I think the biggest upside Michigan State has had all year is they don't turn it over very much and they don't commit a lot of dumb penalties. And if all that continues, You never know. Ohio State's had some flaws this year, too. The problem is it's senior day there. This is a record class for their seniors, and they obviously have a sense of resolve that they want to send them out on a winning note no matter who they play. But nonetheless, you still got to play the game, and I think those are ways Michigan State, if it can capture some of that magic, can go ahead and have a chance to win the game.
I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber. This morning we're talking with Tim Staudt. We're kind of prepping up this Ohio State-Michigan State game. It's fair to say that the winner of this game is likely going to win the East, right?
No, because Michigan State then has to come home and play Penn State, which I don't think will be an easy game at all. It'll be a letdown game after a massive build-up, and Ohio State has to go to Michigan. And that's a rivalry game, which if Michigan beats Penn State tomorrow, if the two favorites win tomorrow, if the two favorite teams win tomorrow, Ohio State and Michigan, then those two will play for the Big Ten East title. And I think Ohio State, frankly, could have a tougher time in Ann Arbor tomorrow than what Ohio State might have at home against Michigan State.
So it's still possible Michigan could win the Big Ten.
There's no question about it. Michigan, like I say, if the two favorites win. Now, look, Michigan would have to beat Ohio State in Ann Arbor in a rivalry game, though. But, you'd have a 9-2 Michigan team, extremely motivated. And, is Ohio State going to be able to get back up 2 weeks in a row? And then either one of them who survives that, or even Michigan State for that matter, that's going to have to survive a game against Iowa on a neutral site. Who's a very good defensive team, and so on and so forth. So, it doesn't end tomorrow for anyone in terms of winning it, but it will end tomorrow for teams like, Michigan and Michigan State, if Michigan loses and if Michigan State loses. Those teams have to win tomorrow to stay alive.
You mentioned Iowa just a second ago. They're undefeated in that West Division. Is Iowa really that good, or is the West just not very good?
Well, probably a combination of them all. I mean, look, I give credit for being 10-0, and they're probably going to be 11-0 after winning at home against Purdue tomorrow. I don't know whether they can go on the road 6 days later and win at Nebraska, who will be playing that game off a bye week to get into a bowl game. But nonetheless, I think Iowa's playing with a little swagger now and a little confidence. I'm surprised they're ranked as high as they are in the playoff standings, but nobody's beaten them yet, and they seem to be getting a little bit better week by week. Whether or not they can finish off 12-0, as I say, winning at Nebraska for them is not going to be an easy thing to do. I think they'll win tomorrow, although the weather is going to be horrible in Iowa City. They're going to have to fight a lot of snow there tomorrow, which can make things goofy. But nonetheless, this is still probably going to come down in the long run to the Big Ten championship game between Iowa and more than likely either Ohio State or Michigan State, with Michigan still in the mix, certainly.
Very good. Tim Staudt, he is a longtime sports broadcaster here in the Lansing area. Thanks for joining us on the broadcast today.
No problem, Al. No problem. Anytime.
You're listening to The Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter. Thanks for joining us this morning. We'll listen to sports and wrap things up here after this.